Hello. Today is September 21st, 2022, and I'm making this video for LaValley's How to Be a Christ group that she asked me to do a workshop for sometime later this year. And I haven't really talked to Lori about making this video, but I think I suggested it to her in an email where I was saying that perhaps an introductory video to the idea of what I call the World Peace Society would be useful. I had sent Lori an email about some of the basic, or we could call it the basic idea of the World Peace Society, which is the idea that our peace of mind is absolutely connected to the goal of peace in the world, and that we cannot have inner peace by disconnecting those ideas. In other words, if I say, well, I'm going to just be about my own inner peace, and I'm not going to concern myself with the goal of peace on earth. And in my life, in my long journey of, you could say, spiritual growth, I don't particularly like to use that term because, in my view, spirit doesn't really grow. I have been a long-time student of A Course in Miracles, of course, along with a good number of other things in my life. I'm 61 this year, and born in 1961, and I thought that's interesting. I'm 61, born in 61. I guess that happens to most people in their life. Their age and the year that they were born will coincide at some point. But if you were born in 1991, then you'd have to live to 91 for that to happen. So I guess that doesn't happen for everyone. But so that's this year for me. And I'm familiar with Lori's father's book, How to Be a Christ. I haven't read the whole thing. I've only read parts out of it. And to me, it is completely in line, the parts that I've read, with the teachings of either A Course in Miracles or other guided spiritual paths.
Joined Miracle of Miracles. He had joined my mom's metaphysical center.
This is the only video of Lori on the internet that I'm aware of.
She talked about that a few days ago, where she had, they rented a place and gathered all the people.
I don't necessarily go and read everything that comes my way because it's like a guitar lesson. I may have already encountered those chords in another book. So I don't necessarily take every guitar lesson that comes my way. I'm really looking for things that are new to me, in a sense. You could say closer to God. And I first began talking about the idea of the World Peace Society back in around 1989, which was 3 years after I encountered and began reading A Course in Miracles, which was about 6 years after a kind of transformation experience that I had involved in other metaphysical teachings. That earlier experience was really what shifted my life. Prior to that, I guess I wanted to be one of the Beatles, and I should have been, but Paul McCartney got to there first, and apparently that wasn't my life karma for this particular lifetime. So I have to just go with that. He got there first, and but I learned a lot of Beatles songs and still know a lot of Beatles songs. But around 1980, when I was 18 years old, I got involved in a metaphysical spiritual practice and had a transformational consciousness shift that was transformational. And it really changed the rest of my life in the sense that I really sort of said, this is what I want to do with my life, as opposed to being a musician, which I loved music and still played music for years later, but I think a lot of people go down the path of being a musician and are very talented, and of course it doesn't really work as a career. Not that my experience in spirituality has really necessarily really worked for me as a career either, which is an interesting side subject, because I think that one of the major shifts for me from my spiritual experience was not being about money, or saying that I don't want a life that is about money. And of course, coming from a normal world, there's bound to be a lot of conflict between the part of you that may see the value of being about more than money in your life. And but that was the early part of my spiritual journey. And so after that early transformation experience around 1980, which I was involved in transformational teachings, you could say, from a particular teacher, I also began to expand out and look into other spiritual teachers and found great value in what they had to teach. And so that process continued until 1986, when my mother, actually, who was always involved in her own spiritual journey, had a copy of A Course in Miracles in her house, and when I encountered that for the first time. And initially, my reaction to it was actually kind of bad, because she had the book in her bedroom next to her bed, open to the workbook, which I guess she was reading. And my first reaction was that it was her kind of flowery spiritual teaching, which I guess I didn't have a whole lot of respect for, because to me, that didn't get down to the darkness in the world that needs to be addressed. So a lot of people who, for example, are involved in positive spiritual affirmations, that's how I saw when I looked at the workbook and read what was in there. And I don't remember what it was I read, but there are a lot of positive spiritual affirmations in the workbook. And I noticed that a lot of people, like my mother, who tend to kind of want to get out of their head, they'll go to the workbook first because the text is too just ideas. There's definitely you could say a vein in the world of people who, want to learn through, quote, doing. So they want exercises. And the workbook is, quote, exercises. But it says in the beginning of the workbook that
a theoretical foundation such as the text provides is necessary as a framework to make the exercises in this workbook meaningful. Yet it is doing the exercises that will make the goal of the course possible. An untrained mind can accomplish nothing. It is the purpose of this workbook to train your mind to think along the lines the text sets forth.
this workbook is meaningless exercise without the concepts and the foundation that the text provides. So my first reaction was not positive, and I really don't know why I went back and gave it a second look. I don't know, because I remember that reaction, and I remember sort of thinking, oh, this is that sort of airy-fairy spirituality that my mother is into, and I walked away, and I don't know. Maybe it was sheer boredom or, my search for higher learning that I went back and thought I'd look at some other part of A Course in Miracles, because I don't remember. But I believe I went back and started reading the text, and it's my memory is kind of vague on this, but I do remember at some point I was very drawn into reading the text, and I don't know what it was. Something about, it could have been, the opening introduction with nothing real can be threatened and nothing unreal exists, because that more absolute kind of philosophical thought was something that attracted me at that time, prior to that time, a lot. I wasn't so much of a person who wanted to do exercises, so to speak. My mother was always talking about her need to be grounded. I need to be more grounded. And she was just caught up in a lot of stuff. I don't want to go off talking about her. She was a great lady in some ways, but she also was always looking at, and always somewhat a little bit unhappy. And she was always talking about needing to be grounded. I'd say, Mom, what do you want me to push you into the ground? What's your problem? But that's sort of the thing, is that I think people in that respect feel that they need to do an exercise, something that's sort of down to earth. And a lot of that just talk in the text, going on for chapters about ideas. I think Lori is very versed in A Course in Miracles, but a lot of people I know have started, like I have a friend, and he had trouble with it. I met a woman in Cottonwood, Arizona, she was an older woman who said she found the Course too challenging in some way. Like she was looking for something that brings her sort of a sense of peace, and she was a student of Zen teachings, and she liked those, which I could relate to because I'd read a fair amount of Zen teachings, and the earlier transformational group that I'd been involved with around 1980 was heavily influenced by Zen Buddhism and was referred to by some people as a Zen enlightenment experience that the leader of this group was offering to people, even though it wasn't in a Buddhist format way back in the 80s. We have to go way back in the time machine. But, so I don't know what it was or what had happened, but I remember sitting on my mother's couch downstairs and really just reading right through A Course in Miracles, and it felt like music to me, which is my experience of A Course in Miracles has been like that. And I enjoyed it. It's hard to explain because some people I know find it very difficult. My friend who found it difficult, he just kept getting hung up on what particular words mean. And in his life, he has gotten hung up on that many times. And when I would talk about the World Peace Society, he'd say, what do you mean by peace? And I would do my best to, because you can think of peace in different ways. The Quakers, for example, will talk about a lack of war, but a lack of conflict could be not not what peace is. I mean, you could have oppression and everybody's quiet and nobody's saying anything. That's not peace. That's oppression. On the surface, that may look like peace. The Quakers will talk about that. I went to a Quaker high school, by the way. I'm not Quaker. My mother was brought up in some sort of Episcopal thing, and my father was essentially an agnostic. His parents were essentially agnostics, and he was a great, I want to say psychologist, but that doesn't quite describe him. He was a great listener. My dad. I have to give him great credit, and when people talk negatively about atheists, I'm like, well, you never met my dad. And there are a lot of great atheists. And we have to remember that as people who talk about spirituality and God and all that stuff. I tend to say God loves atheists because God knows we have crazy ideas in this world about God that need to be addressed. And even though atheists are saying they're coming from a place of just rejecting all spirituality and rejecting all religion, they have a great function in the world. And their great function is to say, how do you know what you think you know? That's a great function. We need that. Jesus would have us ask that question. You know, in the Bible, Peter says, be ready to explain your faith. And I think that that statement from Peter, which occurs after the Gospels, I believe that that was most likely something that Jesus said as well. Be ready. It's in that spirit of, we're not just coming from blah. There's more here than just, I blindly believe.
Believe it or not, this video went on for another 15 minutes.
But I'm not going to show you that. Not now. It's just too much.